We're learning Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah, Perek Zayin Halacha Daled. A person has to start la'aschel b'gnus, to state that the trouble that we were in, l'sayim b'shvach, and to conclude with praise. So we'll go down to the Peirush. La'aschel b'gnus, l'sayim b'shvach. Shvach is the leaving of Mitzrayim. Keitza maschel. How does he begin? Mesaper shebetchila hoyu aviseinu b'mei terech. We go all the way back to Terach, that he was over the Avodah Zorah, Milfon of him, and before him as well. Koifrim v'toyin acha hahevel. They were apostates, and they were mistakenly going after that which has no basis to it. And they go after idol worship, and that's the gnus. That's speaking disparagingly about them. U'misayim, and he concludes with the true religion which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has brought us to it. V'vdilonu, and he separated us from the other nations. V'kiravonu liyichudai, and he brought us to his oneness. V'chein, so too, maschel mediya, he comes along and he tells us she'avodim hayinu l'parim mitzrayim, that we were avodim in Pari. V'chol aro shegamalonu, and all the evil that he did us, which Paro did. This is the gnus. U'misayim b'nisim, and he concludes with nisim and infloy shenas alonu, with the wonders that were done for us. Ubechiroi seinu, and our being chosen. That's also a praise. Sheyidroish, that means one should discuss at length mi'arami ovid ovi, not just say the words from arami ovid ovi, and sheyigmor kol parsha, until he finishes the entire parsha. Everyone who extensively discusses what we find in Dvarim 26:5. The Magen Mishnah says here the question is, where do you start from? Arami Ovid Ovi, and the Gemara explains my gnus. What's the gnus that Lavan tried to destroy us? He start from beginning, where it says we were at one time children of people who kept idol worship. Shmuel Omar that we start from the servitude in Mitzrayim. The Rambam paskins like both of them. First he brings the words of Rav, and he continues Avodim like Shmuel. And the Riv and the Rosh saying that the minig is like both of them. That it's only minig. Really la lochem. You can start from Avodim like Shmuel, or like Rav from Mitzchila Avodah Zorah. For the Lashon HaRambam, there's no proof if he intended to do like both of them, or he's of the opinion that there's no disagreement. Also, according to Rav and to Shmuel, you have to mention both. The question is, which one is the first item mentioned? Why do you start about the Shibud Mitzrayim and then explain the history of Klal Yisrael to that point, or you start off from the history of Klal Yisrael and you come to Avodim Hayinu? The Rambam made the order first Mitchilo Yaviseinu, the days of Terach, and today Kiravnu Amokan Avodah Zorah, and afterwards Avodim Hayinu L'Parim Mitzrayim. And he says in Perek Ches Halacha Gimel, Masel B'Gnus, and he doesn't say what gnus he begins with. Now, there's something else we should point out. The Agoda of the Rambam, he explains that first you say Avodim Hayinu L'Parim, and then only after you say that, so you say Mitchilo Oid Avodah Zorah Yaviseinu. So he says the other way around from what we have. Now the Agoda itself, who was the source of the Agoda, we don't know, and Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned except for one time when they mention a posuk. Now, where do you find this basis that you have to start off with denigration and then you end up with praise? Rabbeinu Manoach explains we learn it from you start with Mitchil Avodah Zorah from Torah. That's in the posuk, as it says, Ki Shorah Bincha Mochel Leimor. If your children shall ask you, that he's talking about Torah here. And you shall tell him, and we'll turn to the page. You will tell your son, we were avodim to power in Mitzrayim, Hashem in Mitzrayim, B'yod Chazokah. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out with a great strength. And then we learn from what it says in Posuk Chav Daled, Vayitzaveinu Hashem la'ashes kol hachukim eilo liyos Hashem alikenu, that God commanded us to do all of these chukim, so that we should fear Hashem. That to begin with, we did Avodah Zarah, we weren't fearful of Hashem. And by Yetzias Mitzrayim, after we saw that HaKadosh Baruch Hu controls all of nature, because every one of the makos, in a sense, parallels every one of the 10 statements with which the world was created, is then it went into our hearts the true belief in Hashem. And this is the obligation from the Torah. Because he had the problem, why in the Leila Seder you have to mention about Avodah Zarah, and it would seem it has nothing to do with Yetzias Mitzrayim. So he explains, no. Once we saw the Makis, Mitzrayim, then Vayos Hashem, Vayaminu Hashem, and Moshe Avdoi. And he explains through the Nisim, the miracles and the great wonders that we saw in Yetzias Mitzrayim, that rooted in our hearts belief. And we find this is why the language of the Rambam is very correct. And not only we make terach ulafonov, that they were apostates, and they were going after that which has no value to it, which is Avodah Zarah. And we conclude with the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose us. Now, Hilchos Avodah Zarah, the Rambam cites that everyone made a mistake. They went after Avodah Zarah because they couldn't, as he continues over there, because they couldn't comprehend how HaKadosh Baruch Hu could follow after such insignificant beings in an insignificant world, in such a huge universe. And therefore they must be sub-lieutenants to Hashem. And only after Avraham Avinu was born did this concept of belief become a basis. And the Rambam concludes that when Klal Yisrael were in Mitzrayim for many, many years, they learned Avodah Zarah, and they were nearly, this basic belief, which was rooted from Avraham Avinu, was nearly lost. And when Moshe came, and through Yetzias Mitzrayim, Hashem again made the roots grow of belief in Hashem. Thus we see, I mentioned Avodah Zarah to tell you that just like Avram came along and made us believers, so too, when we left, what happened in Mitzrayim reinforced that situation. And one begins with Avodah Mitzrayim, like in the Psukim, why do you have these commandments? And you say Avodah. That's why the Rambam says it first. But therefore we say, maybe there's another reason we say Avodah, even though that first we were Avodah Zarah, and that would seem to be before the time that they were Avodah Mitzrayim, and we should emphasize HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the Makis implanted in our hearts the belief in Hashem, and therefore we start Avodah Mitzrayim in the order that we find in the Psukim. We'll go on to the next halacha. We're learning Perek Zayin halacha Hey. If you don't say the following three things on the night of Pesach, you do not fulfill your obligation. These are them. Pesach, Matzah, Mor. Let's go down to the Peirush. Even though you say everything else, we have to mention Ve'elohein, Pesach, Matzah, Mor. Pesach, Rambam continues, Al Shum She Posach, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu jumped over HaMokri. HaKadosh Baruch Hu jumped over Al Botei V'Seinu Mitzrayim when he punished the firstborn of the Egyptians, and not the firstborn of the Jews. And we learn this from what it says in the Posuk Shenema in Shmois Yud Beis 12:27. V'amatem zevach Pesach ul Hashem. That one must say it is a zevach Pesach ul Hashem. Why? Asher Posach. The Posuk says, God skipped the house of Bnei Yisrael when he smote the Egyptians, and he saved. That we have to know that that's the reason of Pesach. Mora comes al shum shemora Mitzrayim Mitzrayim, because the Mitzrayim made our life very bitter. Matzah al shem shenigalu, because they were redeemed. These three items are what are called Haggadah. And Magen Mishnah cites the Mishnah in Sochem 1:16b. A. Rae Gann says, whoever did not say these three things on Pesach did not fulfill his obligation. Pesach, Matzah, Mora. Rabbeinu Menoach and Meiri have the opinion you have to explain, not just say the three words, you have to say the reasoning and why it's done. However, knowing the reason without doing it doesn't help. And in fact, it impedes. So Rabbeinu Menoach cites the Gemara. Shlomo HaMelech had a mistake. He thought the reason you have to keep the mitzvahs, and therefore he thought that even though he thought there was a reason behind every mitzvah, and if the reason is no longer there, then you don't have to keep them. And therefore, he was of the opinion that even though a king is commanded not to have many wives, or not to have many horses, and not to have a lot of money, he thought that him it won't affect, and therefore he's not commanded by it. Ultimately, he was affected by it, but in any case, he would have transgressed according to the Rambam. And he adds, every mitzvah, you should know the reasoning, and certainly Mitzvah Pesach, that it will awaken the belief in Hashem, because it goes Mitzrayim, Yisrael were redeemed, and all the nations knew that Hashem is the sole master of the world, both in heaven and earth. But in Sefer Telos Odom, which is written by the Chai Odom, he infers in the Psukim that it doesn't mean that you have to say the reason of Pasach Matzah Mora, but you have to say the three words themselves. However, La Halacha, he writes in Chai Odom that it means you have to say the reasoning as well. And that's what it was simply language of the Rambam infers. You have to say the reason as well, otherwise you don't fulfill your obligation. In the Mishnah, you did not fulfill your obligation. The Ran says that you didn't do it properly, but not totally, because he did the mitzvah. He said Haggadah. He forgot to say these three words. Now, and these words are called Haggadah. What does he mean? That we learned in Halacha Gimel, it means all the last three, the items that you have to ask and answer. That's part of the night's obligation. You start from the state we were in a very bad state, and we end with praise to Hashem and saying Pesach Matzah Mora. The Ami Brocha cites that Rabbi Bris said in the name of his father, Rab Chaim, every night of Pesach, he would emphasize before he kept the mitzvah, the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. He would tell his children that even though these three things have to do with the Leila Seder, they're not in the mitzvah of the Chiyuv of Yetzias Mitzrayim throughout the year. Only on the night of Pesach. The Chai Odom says that every night is an obligation every day is an obligation to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. But on this night, you have to discuss it, as it's mentioned, as it's ordered. The order is made in the Haggadah. Therefore, Gamliel says, if you didn't say these three things, you didn't fulfill this obligation of stating the Haggadah. Yaakov Melissa says, he infers that mitzvahs of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim on this night is a sipur that has to have intensity to it, depth, and everything that happened from beginning to end. It's not enough just to say, oh, there were plagues in Egypt and we were taken out. Otherwise, what is different this night from every other night of the year when you have to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim? That's why it says V'gav to Levincha, that you have to tell at length the statement. Hagoda also means relating. It's not just speaking. You're telling over a message, and therefore it takes time. Thus, Chaim, the Chayodam, the Maisinissim, all of the opinion of Midaraisa, Leila Seder is different than the rest of the year. The Prima Godem is of the opinion that the Nusach, the Hagoda, that we have it from the time of the Chazal. The Torah, if he says Hashem Yitziyanu Mitzrayim, he would fulfill his obligation, and the Chiv to say Pesach U'Matzah more is only Midarabonon. Chodesh is the opinion, Zechel Yitziyas Mitzrayim and Kiddush fulfills our obligation. The Avud Raham on the Hagoda writes in the name of the Riv, and he brings down that the Rashba wrote that there's no limit to the mitzvah of Sibri Yitziyas Mitzrayim or the Pesach. Even with one statement, which he mentions Yitziyas Mitzrayim, he fulfills his obligation. And he says that's why we don't make a broch on Sibri Yitziyas Mitzrayim, or should be told to Yitziyas Mitzrayim, because by saying Zechel Yitziyas Mitzrayim, we were already fulfilled our obligation. If we said Sapir Yitziyas Mitzrayim, that would also be a Zecher. But everyone agrees that if you continue, you're fulfilling the mitzvah continuously. It's not that you did it and now you're just expanding it. Thus we see that even those Rishonim, and that in the entire year it's enough to say Yitziyas Mitzrayim, you don't have to continue. But on the night of Pesach, you have to say the Nisim and the Floys, the miracles and the wonders. Even if you just said Zechel Yitziyas Mitzrayim, it would be enough. But certainly that the specification and the ongoing discussion is praiseworthy on this night. It's called Hagoda because we find in the Gemara this word in the Gemara Psochim 1:15b, who says Agadato, and it comes to the posuk of Agadato Levonecho, the word Hagoda. You should teach your children, and we should be able to inculcate ourselves with the Emunah of Yitziyas Mitzrayim.